Inside Rikers, the reality that no one wants to face, the true story of America's most notorious jail. The night the lights went out in Rikers. It was 2:17 a.m. inside Rikers Island when the power went out. The long, echoing corridors of the world's most infamous jail plunged into darkness. For a moment, silence filled the air. Then came the screaming. From every cell block, inmates began to bang their fists on the metal doors. Some shouted for guards. Others laughed, a deep, hollow laugh that echoed off the concrete. In the darkness, someone yelled, "Tonight, the island eats itself." Guards scrambled with flashlights, but batteries were dying. Radios crackled with static. A thick smell of sweat, fear, and something metallic, blood, began to rise from the tier. An officer's voice cut through the chaos. "Control to Post B, we've lost the cameras. We can't see the inmates." Then a distant sound, sharp and fast. A fight had broken out. In the dark. No supervision. No escape. For 3 hours, Rikers Island became a cage of chaos. And when the lights finally flickered back on, one inmate was dead, another barely breathing, and 3 correctional officers were injured. That night, the truth about Rikers could no longer be hidden. It wasn't just a jail, it was a war zone. But how did it get this bad? And why do so many people, guards, inmates, even politicians, refuse to face the reality inside Rikers Island? Fade in cinematic narration voice. To understand that night, we need to go back to the beginning of the nightmare. Welcome to Rikers. When the bus doors opened, the smell hit first. A mix of sweat, mold, bleach, and hopelessness. New arrivals stepped off the bus, their ankles clinking with chains. Outside the fence, the New York skyline glittered, but in here, time moved differently. Every face told a story. Some men were terrified. Others looked numb, already used to the system. And then there were the veterans, those who had been in and out so many times they greeted the officers by name. Rikers Island wasn't just another jail. It was a place where the city dumped its problems. The poor, the addicted, the mentally ill, the forgotten. And it showed. Inside the intake building, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Guards barked orders. Hands against the wall. Empty your pockets. A young inmate, barely 19, flinched when an officer slammed a clipboard down near his face. He whispered to another inmate, "How long you think we'll last in here?" The other man just laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Depends who you talk to. Or who you bump into." For the new arrivals, that first day was a test. They learned fast who ran the phones, who controlled the showers, and which corners to avoid after dark. There were rules here, written and unwritten. The officers had their own code. The inmates had theirs. And between the two, chaos waited for its turn. The calm before the storm. In the early days, new inmates tried to keep their heads down. They mopped floors, wrote letters home, and hoped their lawyers would call. Some prayed. Some cried quietly when lights went out. But peace never lasted long. Rumors spread about a gang war brewing in Cell Block D. About a correctional officer accused of taking bribes. About inmates smuggling in phones through food deliveries. The spark that ignites it all. Then one afternoon, it happened. 2 rival inmates, from 2 different boroughs, met in the hallway outside the kitchen. A simple stare turned into words. Words turned into shoves. And within seconds, chaos exploded. A tray clattered to the floor, guards shouted, and inmates rushed forward. Fists flew. Shanks flashed. The smell of metal and blood filled the air again. By the time the alarm sounded, 5 inmates were down, 1 barely breathing. And for the rest of Rikers, the message was clear. The war had begun. The price of silence. The blood from the kitchen floor had barely dried before the entire jail felt the ripple. Whispers carried faster than the guards could move. Every inmate knew who started it, who got hurt, and who would pay next. Rikers was built on rumors, and those rumors could kill you faster than any blade. The officers walked the tiers in silence now. Their eyes darted to every cell, hands resting near their radios. They'd seen what happened when fights weren't contained. It spread like fire, one housing unit at a time. A 23-year-old inmate named Malik sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the wall. He wasn't involved in the fight, not directly. But one of the men who got stabbed was from his block. And in Rikers, guilt didn't need proof, only connection. That night, the sound of footsteps echoed down the tier. A voice whispered from cell to cell. "They're coming for him tonight." Malik clenched his fists. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. The air felt heavy, like the island itself was holding its breath. The next morning, guards found a razor blade hidden inside a toothpaste tube. Then another, inside a shoe. They locked the entire block down. Hours passed. No visits. No yard time. No talking. Just the endless hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of fists hitting steel doors. A correctional captain walked through the unit and said quietly to another guard, "It's going to blow again. We can feel it." But the higher-ups didn't care. They'd seen it all before. "Just another day at Rikers," they said. The boiling point. That night, something strange happened. The intercom crackled on, then cut off. The lights flickered once, twice, then went dark. The same way they did during the blackout weeks before. Malik froze. He could hear voices, faint at first, then closer. Shuffling. Breathing. The scrape of something metal on concrete. He stood up, backing toward his door. His heart raced so hard he could feel it in his throat. From the next cell, a voice whispered, "They're here, bro, don't make a sound." A flash of light from a contraband phone lit the corridor for half a second, enough to see shadows moving. Then came the scream. Someone in cell 14 shouted for help, banging the door until his hands bled. Guards sprinted down the hallway with flashlights, yelling commands, but by the time they reached the cell, it was too late. The inmate inside lay motionless. His bedsheet was twisted, blood streaked across the wall. It wasn't a random act. It was a message. From that night on, everyone in the block understood. Silence was safer than truth. Nobody talked. Nobody asked. Because at Rikers, asking the wrong question could get you killed. The next morning, the warden held a meeting. His words were cold and empty. "We're investigating. Everything's under control." But inside the cells, every man knew nothing was under control. And Malik, still sitting in the same spot as the night before, whispered to himself, "They won't stop until somebody makes them." The war for survival had just begun. When the guards turned their backs, days turned into weeks. The tension in Rikers was now thick enough to choke on. Every conversation was whispered. Every step watched. The walls felt alive, buzzing with anger, fear, and revenge. Malik kept his head down, avoiding trouble. But trouble in Rikers didn't need permission. It came for you when it wanted. One afternoon, during chow time, an officer named Daniels escorted Malik's block to the cafeteria. Daniels had been working Rikers for 10 years. He'd seen stabbings, riots, suicides, and each one left a scar on his mind. He used to believe he could make a difference. Not anymore. The cafeteria smelled like bleach and burnt bread. Inmates lined up for trays, gray meat, watery beans, and a slice of stale cornbread. Guards stood in pairs, eyes darting from table to table. But that day, Daniels noticed something small. A folded napkin, passed from one inmate to another. It seemed harmless, but at Rikers, even silence could be a signal. He leaned toward another guard and muttered, "It's about to go bad again." He was right. Within seconds, the napkin hit the floor and chaos erupted. Two inmates from rival crews lunged at each other with sharpened plastic spoons. Tables flipped. Trays clattered. Officers charged forward with pepper spray, shouting commands that no one could hear. Malik hit the floor, covering his head as boots stomped inches away from his face. When it was over, the air stung with chemicals, and blood streaked across the wall. That night, Daniel sat alone in the guard station, staring at the security cameras. He watched inmates move like ghosts through the corridors, whispering and plotting in corners the cameras couldn't see. He took off his badge, rubbed his tired eyes, and said quietly to himself, "This place is eating us all alive." But what came next, even Daniels couldn't have predicted. The payback. 3 days later, during recreation time, a group of inmates were let out into the yard. It was supposed to be peaceful, sunlight, fresh air, a break from the madness. But peace doesn't last long at Rikers. A guard's whistle blew, 1, 2, 3 sharp blasts. Then screaming. A group from Malik's block cornered a man from the rival crew. The fight wasn't quick. It was deliberate. A guard nearby froze, Daniels. He could have stepped in, but he didn't. He just stood there, hand hovering over his radio. He knew calling backup meant risking another riot. He knew the brass would only blame the officers, not the system. So, he turned away. By the time other guards arrived, it was over. The inmate lay motionless, face down in the dirt, the rest of the yard standing silent. Malik watched from a distance, his stomach twisting. He wasn't part of it, but he was part of Rikers. And that made everyone guilty by default. That night, Daniel sat in his car before going home. He stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror and whispered, "We're not guards anymore, we're just surviving like them." Rikers had swallowed another soul, and it wasn't done yet. The system inside the system. By the time the next week rolled around, Rikers Island was running on fear. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. Not the inmates, not the officers, not even the captains. Every face wore the same look, exhaustion mixed with quiet paranoia. Malik had started to notice things. Certain cells got extra food trays. Certain inmates were suddenly moved to easier units. And certain guards, the ones who were supposed to be enforcing the rules, were quietly making their own. It started with cigarettes, traded through food slots for cash sent through Cash App on the outside. Then came phones, drugs, even small weapons. Everything had a price, and everyone had a buyer. Malik once overheard an officer say to another, "We don't run Rikers. The inmates do, we just survive long enough to get paid." That line stuck with him. Because it was true. Inside Rikers, there was a system inside the system. A dark economy that thrived on fear and silence. The stronger inmates controlled the phones and the food. The weaker ones paid rent just to stay safe. Even time, the one thing they were supposed to be serving, could be sold. Malik tried to stay out of it. But it was impossible. In here, you either played the game or became part of someone else's. One evening, during lockdown, an officer slid an envelope under Malik's door. Inside was a phone, small, burner style, wrapped in a sheet of plastic. No note. No explanation. At first, he thought it was a mistake. But when the phone buzzed later that night, a voice whispered through the speaker. "You work for us now. Don't say a word." Malik's hands shook. He didn't know who was this, but he knew better than to ask. The price of power. The next day, an inmate was found unconscious in the showers. No witnesses. No weapons found. No suspects. But everyone knew it wasn't random. It was a message. Someone had stepped out of line. Malik's stomach tightened as he realized what the phone was for. He was being watched, used, and tested. And if he made one wrong move, he'd end up like the man in the showers. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels was drowning in his own guilt. He'd seen the same phone in other cells, smuggled in by people he once trusted. He tried to report it up the chain, but the response was chillingly calm. "Don't dig too deep, Daniels. You won't like what you find." That night, Daniels walked the tier, flashlight trembling in his hand. He passed Malik's cell and stopped. Their eyes met through the small window in the steel door. For a brief second, both men, inmate and guard, saw the same thing in each other, fear. Daniels whispered, "They're running this place now, kid. Not us." Before Malik could reply, another officer called out from down the hall, and Daniels walked away. Hours later, a loud bang echoed through the block, metal slamming against metal. Then came shouting, footsteps, chaos. The prison was erupting again. Malik grabbed the phone, hands shaking, and dialed the only number saved inside. The same cold voice answered, "We told you not to speak, now you'll see what happens when you do." And just like that, the line went dead. The call you can't escape. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. The phone sat on the floor beside his bunk, silent, but heavier than any chain he'd ever worn. Every second felt longer than the last. The air inside the cell was thick, like the walls were closing in. He kept replaying the words in his head. Now you'll see what happens when you do. He didn't know what that meant. But in Rikers, threats weren't just words. They were promises. The next morning, guards rushed into the block. No morning count, no warning, just the sound of boots and radios. They were searching cells, fast and loud. Malik's heart raced. The phone. He hid it under the mattress just before the door opened. Officer Daniel stood there, his face pale and tired. Behind him, another guard barked. Step out. Hands on the wall. Malik obeyed. His mind was spinning. He didn't know if this was about him or something else. He didn't know who to trust. When the guards tore through his cell, they flipped his mattress. The phone slid out, hitting the floor with a soft, plastic tap. For a moment, everything froze. Then Daniel's eyes met Malik's. He looked down at the phone and quietly kicked it under the bunk before the other officer noticed. Nothing here, Daniel said flatly. Move on. The other guard nodded, and they left. When the door slammed shut again, Malik's legs went weak. He sat on the edge of the bunk, breathing hard, staring at the spot where the phone used to be. It was gone. But that wasn't relief, it was dread. Because now, someone else knew. The consequence. Later that night, the block was unusually quiet. No shouting, no banging, just the hum of the lights. Malik knew something was wrong. From his cell window, he saw a flicker of movement. 4 inmates walking together, slow and deliberate. They weren't supposed to be out. His gut twisted. Moments later, the alarm blared. Screams erupted. Doors clanged. Radios crackled with panic. Malik couldn't see what was happening, but he could hear it. Fists hitting flesh. Metal scraping against concrete. The sounds of another life being erased behind bars. When it was over, the lights went red. Lockdown. That night, Daniels came by Malik's cell again. His face looked older, like he'd aged 10 years in a day. He whispered through the slot. They found the guy who made the call. Or what's left of him. Malik didn't say a word. He just stared at the ground. Daniels continued, his voice shaking. This place, it's not about justice. It's about survival. Remember that. Then he walked away, slow, heavy steps fading down the hall. Malik sat in silence, trying to steady his breathing. He had survived the night. But at Rikers, survival was temporary. He looked at the faint reflection of himself in the metal door and muttered, "You can't escape the island. It follows you, even when you leave." And deep down he knew, this was only the beginning. The outside world looks in. Morning came, but inside Rikers, it didn't feel like morning, just another gray stretch of time. The smell of bleach hung heavy in the air. The hallway floors were slick from being mopped, not because of cleanliness, but to wash away what happened the night before. Malik sat on his bunk, staring through the narrow slit in his door. He didn't speak. Didn't move. He was alive, but part of him wasn't anymore. A new officer came on shift that morning, Officer Vega, young, confident, still believing this place could be fixed. She stopped outside Malik's cell and said softly, "You've been quiet lately. You good?" Malik just looked at her, expression blank. "No one's good in here." Vega didn't argue. She'd heard stories, but she hadn't seen what Rikers really was. Not yet. Later that day, she walked into the control booth and noticed Daniel sitting there, silent, staring at the monitors. He looked broken. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. He didn't turn around. No. Just this place for what it really is. On the screen, cameras flicked through grainy feeds, inmates pacing in their cells, others sitting motionless, eyes hollow. A fight broke out in one of the corridors. Vega reached for the intercom, but Daniels stopped her hand. "Don't," he said quietly. "It'll just make it worse." She stared at him, confused. "We're supposed to stop it." "We're supposed to survive it," Daniels replied. That's when Vega realized the system wasn't broken. It was designed this way. The leak. Weeks passed. The violence kept rising, and the news outside began to take notice. A leaked video, shot on a contraband phone, hit social media. It showed a fight in one of the cell blocks. Guards shouting. Blood on the floor. Inmates laughing in the background. The video ended with a chilling message scrawled on the wall in toothpaste. "Welcome to Rikers, where no one makes it out clean." The footage went viral overnight. Every news channel replayed it. Politicians condemned it. The mayor called it unacceptable. But Malik, sitting in his cell, knew the truth. Nothing would change. Because this wasn't new. This had been Rikers for years. Still, the leak brought attention. Advocates began speaking out. Old officers resigned. Investigators came in with clipboards, asking questions they didn't want real answers to. When they reached Malik's cell, he looked at them through the glass and said, "You think this started last week? This started long before any of us got here." The investigator paused, then asked, "Then why hasn't anyone spoken up?" Malik smiled weakly. "Because inside Rikers, truth has a body count." That line made its way into the report, but most of the report never reached the public. Pages were redacted, names erased. Like the island itself, it stayed hidden behind walls and silence. That night, Officer Vega passed Malik's cell again. "You were right," she whispered. "No one's good in here." Malik nodded slowly. "That's the reality no one wants to face." The lights dimmed. Somewhere in the distance, another alarm blared. Rikers kept moving, like a living thing, feeding on fear, swallowing stories before they could ever leave. The day the walls spoke. A week after the leaked video, the whole jail changed. Not because it got safer, but because everyone knew eyes were finally watching. Inspectors came through the gates with clipboards and cameras. The inmates whispered, the officers stiffened, and the air felt heavier than ever. Malik could sense it. Rikers didn't like being seen. This place lived on secrets, on shadows, on pain kept behind concrete. Now, someone had pulled back the curtain. Officer Vega stood in the hallway as the inspectors walked by, pretending to smile. One of them asked, "How often do violent incidents occur here?" Vega hesitated, her jaw tightening. Before she could speak, Daniels cut in. "Every day," he said flatly. "Sometimes every hour." The inspector blinked, unsure how to respond. Daniels just walked away, leaving the question hanging like a bad smell. That night, the tension reached its peak. The administration ordered a lockdown across the entire complex. No movement, no phones, no visits. They said it was for security reasons. But everyone inside knew better. They were trying to hide something. The breaking point. Inside the locked cells, the inmates started chanting. One voice. Then 10. Then 100. It echoed through the corridors like thunder. "We want out. We want the truth." Guards banged on doors, shouting for silence, but it only grew louder. Daniels stood frozen in the control booth, staring at the monitors. He'd never seen anything like it. Every block, every unit, every cell, united in noise. Vega rushed in. "They're losing control," she said. "They never had it," Daniels replied. Then came the sound no one wanted to hear, the deep, rolling boom of metal doors being forced open. Someone had jammed the locks. Within minutes, chaos erupted again. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared, and the prison went red with emergency lights. The chants turned into screams, the screams into silence. Malik was trapped in the middle of it. His block was burning, papers, mattresses, anything they could set on fire. He pressed his face to the crack in the door, coughing, eyes stinging. Then, through the smoke, he saw Daniels, opening cells, one by one, trying to pull men to safety. He wasn't supposed to. It was against every rule. But he did it anyway. When he reached Malik's door, he shouted, "Move. Now." Malik stumbled out, covering his mouth. The two ran through the hallway as flames licked up the walls. Screams echoed behind them, the kind of sound that stays in your bones. They reached the main yard, where officers were forming a line, shields up, batons drawn. It wasn't about rescue anymore. It was containment. Daniels stopped. "If they go in now, people will die," he said. Vega, standing behind him, looked terrified. "They already are." The warden's voice crackled over the radio. "Seal the yard. No one leaves." Daniels threw the radio to the ground. He'd had enough. He grabbed Vega's arm and said, "We're not saving Rikers tonight. We're saving whoever's left of ourselves. And with that, he pushed through the smoke, back into the inferno. Voices from the smoke. When the fires were finally put out hours later, reporters were already at the gates. Helicopters hovered over the island. Sirens wailed across the East River. Rikers Island was on every screen in America. The world was finally watching, and this time, they couldn't look away. Officials called it a disturbance. But those who lived it, inmates, officers, and survivors, knew it was something else entirely. A cry for help from a place the world pretended didn't exist. Malik sat in the yard as dawn broke, ash falling like snow around him. He looked up at the skyline in the distance, so close, yet unreachable. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't in years. Because maybe now, finally, someone out there would face the truth. After the fire, the smoke from the Rikers riot drifted over the East River like a dark cloud hanging above New York City. For the first time in years, the outside world couldn't ignore it. Helicopters circled. News anchors spoke the word Rikers with new intensity, as if they'd just discovered the place existed. But for those still inside, nothing had changed. The smell of burned fabric and melted plastic clung to the air. The walls were scorched, the lights flickered, and the echoes of screams still haunted the corridors. Malik sat in the medical unit with a bandage across his forehead. His hands trembled as a nurse cleaned his cuts. She didn't speak, just worked silently, eyes filled with something between pity and fear. Across the room, Officer Vega was sitting on a metal chair, still in uniform stained with soot. Daniels hadn't been seen since the riot. Some said he'd been transferred. Others said he'd been suspended for breach of protocol. But Malik knew the truth. Daniels had done something Rikers never forgave. He'd cared. The blame game. Days after the fire, officials held a press conference. The city's correction commissioners stood at a podium, flanked by officers in suits and polished shoes. He spoke with calm authority. The incident at Rikers Island is under investigation. We're ensuring the safety of all staff and inmates. But Malik knew those words meant nothing. Because even as he watched the press conference on a flickering TV inside the rec room, another fight broke out 2 cells down. Guards rushed in, swinging batons, spraying gas. Same violence. Different day. The world outside wanted a headline. Inside Rikers, they wanted survival. Later that night, Vega approached Malik's cell. She looked different, tired, broken, her badge hanging loose around her neck. "They're saying this place might finally close," she whispered. Malik gave a half-smile. "They've said that before." "Yeah," she replied softly. But this time, people saw. The letter. 2 days later, Malik received an envelope slipped under his door. No return address. No name. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, handwritten in shaky letters. "I did what I could. Don't stop talking. D." Malik stared at it for a long time. He felt something twist in his chest, grief, guilt, and something like pride. Daniels had risked everything. Now it was Malik's turn. He took the paper, folded it again, and hid it in the only safe place he knew, between the pages of a worn Bible his grandmother once sent him. Then, when the next group of reporters visited the jail, Malik asked to speak. At first, the guards laughed. "Talk to the press? You'll end up in solitary for that." But Malik didn't back down. He told them he had nothing left to lose. So they brought him into a small room, gray walls, a single camera, and 2 journalists behind a glass divider. Malik sat down, his hands cuffed to the table, and said the words that would change everything. "You want to know what Rikers really is? It's not just a jail. It's a place where time stops. Where pain becomes normal. Where people forget they're people. I'm still here because I refuse to stop being human." The room went silent. One of the reporters wiped a tear. The other whispered, "The world needs to hear this." The world reacts. Days later, Malik's story hit the news. His interview aired across America, his face blurred, his voice distorted for safety. But the words hit hard. Protests began outside City Hall. Advocates demanded reform. Former officers came forward with their own stories. And for the first time, people didn't just say, Rikers is bad. They said, Rikers must end. Malik sat in his cell that night, hearing chants faintly echoing from across the river. He smiled for the first time in years. Not because he was free, but because his voice finally was. As the lights dimmed, Vega walked by his cell one last time. She stopped and said quietly, "You did what most of us couldn't." Malik looked up. "No," he said. "I just told the truth." And for once, Rikers Island, the place built on silence, had to listen. The investigation. The truth had escaped the island, and there was no putting it back. After Malik's interview aired, the story spread like wildfire. News vans lined up along the East River, cameras pointing toward Rikers like it was a volcano that had finally erupted. The public wanted answers. And for once, the city was forced to listen. Within a week, a special task force was formed. Investigators, lawyers, journalists, even former correctional staff. They called it Operation Clean Cell. But those who'd been inside knew, you can't clean what was never meant to be clean. Officer Vega was called in for questioning first. She sat in a gray conference room downtown, hands folded, eyes hollow. Across from her, a stern-faced investigator asked, "How long have you been aware of the conditions inside Rikers?" She hesitated. "Since the first day I stepped inside." "And why didn't you report it sooner?" Her voice cracked. "Because nobody listens until it's too late." They asked about the fights, the smuggling, the missing reports, the officers who looked the other way. She told them everything. Every lie. Every secret. Every death that was written off as unexplained. When she left the building that day, she knew she'd made enemies, powerful ones. Behind the curtain. Meanwhile, Malik's name was spreading beyond the walls. Lawyers contacted his family. Advocates called him a whistleblower. And the same system that had tried to silence him, now tried to discredit him. They said he was lying. They said he exaggerated. They called him a troublemaker. But then leaked documents surfaced, reports that had been buried for years. Internal memos. Photos of injuries. Emails from officers warning about broken locks, faulty cameras, and overcrowded units. The truth was undeniable. Rikers wasn't broken by accident. It was broken by design. Daniel's name appeared in those reports, too. He'd filed complaints years before, all ignored. His last report ended with one haunting line. "If nothing changes, this place will collapse, and it'll take us all down with it." Now, that prophecy was coming true. The hearings. Weeks later, City Hall was packed. Journalists filled the aisles. Former inmates sat shoulder to shoulder with correctional officers. At the front, Malik's family sat silently, clutching a photo of him from before Rikers, before the fear, before the scars. When Malik's turn came, he appeared on a large screen from inside the facility. His voice was calm, his eyes steady. "You want to fix Rikers?" he said. "Then stop pretending it's about justice. This is about money, power, fear. We're stacked in cages like animals and told to become better people. But you can't fix a human being in a place built to break them." The room fell silent. Even the politicians shifted uncomfortably. Because deep down, they knew he was right. The reaction. Within days, headlines exploded. Rikers under federal investigation. City promises reform after whistleblower testimony. Officers suspended amid growing scandal. The mayor called it a dark chapter in New York's history. Advocates called it a victory. But Malik didn't call it anything. From his cell, he just stared at the distant skyline, a quiet storm in his eyes. For him, justice wasn't on paper. It was in the lives still trapped behind those walls. That night, Vega stopped by his cell again. "They're saying they might shut this place down," she said. Malik didn't move. "Rikers isn't a place," he said softly. "It's a mindset. If they don't change that, they'll just build another one." She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. "Then maybe it's time someone like you helped stop that from happening." For the first time, Malik didn't answer. He just looked out at the moonlight cutting through the bars, the same light he hadn't seen in years, and whispered, "If I ever get out of here, I will." Camera pans out from his cell, over the island, the river, and into the glittering city beyond. The voice of a reporter echoes faintly. Rikers Island, a place finally forced to face its own reality. The last day on the island. Months passed. The investigations deepened. The headlines never stopped. For once, Rikers Island wasn't just a whisper, it was a warning. Construction crews arrived to begin the slow process of shutting down units one by one. Reporters stood outside the gates every morning, waiting for updates. And inside those walls, the men and women who had survived it all, inmates and officers alike, felt something strange. Silence. No alarms. No shouts. Just a heavy stillness that came after decades of chaos. Malik sat by the barred window of his unit, staring out at the East River. The skyline glowed in the distance, free, bright, untouchable. He could hear the faint hum of a helicopter circling overhead. For the first time, it wasn't here for a riot or a death. It was here to mark history. The reckoning. Officer Vega stood in the yard, watching the inmates being transferred to buses one by one. She saw faces she'd known for years, some hardened, some hollow, some quietly hopeful. She didn't smile. There wasn't anything to smile about. Daniels never came back. Some said he'd taken early retirement. Others said he'd vanished, tired of fighting a system that fought back harder. But Vega knew his spirit hadn't disappeared. It lived on in every small act of resistance, every guard who refused to turn away, every inmate who dared to speak up. When Malik's name was called, he stood, hands cuffed, chains clinking at his ankles. As he stepped onto the bus, he looked back one last time, at the rows of towers, the cracked concrete, the endless fences. Every sound, every scream, every shadow felt like it was whispering his name. He closed his eyes. And for a moment he could almost hear Daniel's voice again. This place will collapse, and it'll take us all down with it. Only now it wasn't collapsing, it was ending. The world watches. Outside, crowds had gathered, former inmates, activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens who had never set foot inside but had finally heard its truth. They watched as the last bus rolled off the bridge, carrying the final group of inmates away from the island. The air was cold, but there was something electric in it, the sense that an era had ended. Cameras flashed. Protest signs waved. People chanted Malik's words. You can't fix a human being in a place built to break them. Across the city, murals appeared, painted on concrete walls, subway tunnels, school hallways. Faces of the forgotten. Quotes from survivors. A reminder that Rikers wasn't just a place, it was a mirror of everything the world tried not to see. The promise. Months later, Malik walked out of a halfway house in Queens. He wasn't the same man who had arrived at Rikers years ago. He carried scars, not all of them visible. But he carried something else too. Purpose. He began speaking at community centers, schools, and youth programs. He told his story not as a victim, but as a witness. If my pain can stop one kid from ending up in that place, he said, then maybe it wasn't for nothing. Vega came to one of his talks, sitting quietly in the back of the room. When it ended, she walked up to him and said, "You did it. You made them see." Malik shook his head. "No. We did. Everyone who lived it, the guards, the inmates, even the ones who didn't make it." He paused, looking out at the small crowd of young faces staring up at him. Rikers was never just a jail. It was a message. And maybe now we can write a different one. The reality we can't ignore. Rikers Island is gone now, its cells empty, its corridors silent. But the truth it revealed still echoes. Because what happened there wasn't just about crime. It was about neglect. It was about what happens when a society locks away its problems instead of fixing them. Malik's story isn't just one man's survival, it's a mirror held up to the world outside. The violence inside Rikers was born from the same indifference that exists beyond its walls. And that's the reality no one wants to face. But as long as people like Malik keep speaking, as long as voices like Vega's and Daniel's don't fade into silence, maybe, just maybe, we won't build another Rikers again. Soft ambient music rises, the sound of waves hitting the shore, the hum of the city in the distance. The island is closed, Malik says in the final shot, standing by the water, wind blowing through his hair. But the fight for dignity, for truth, for life, that never ends. Fade to black. Text on screen. Rikers Island officially closed its last active jail in fictionalized timeline. But for thousands who lived through it, the memories remain.